Today we have a discussion on the Anglo-American or European-American poet, a woman of the 20th century. And distinctly I would say that the 20th century poetry in essence is both the century of revolt in poetry, that is, of revolt and psychology. The combination is strange, weird maybe, but then it is true about generally the poetic voices among women, and more specifically Sylvia Plath, on which Professor Payal Nagpal will be speaking. She teaches English in Janki Devi Memorial College there at university, and she is deeply interested in the latest trends of literature, and particularly of the 20th century, from the point of view of feminism. So these are the traits that you are going to confront in the intellectual sense from her, and I would like to see her refreshing intervention in the discussion that will happen with respect to this writer Sylvia Plath. So over to you, Professor Payal Nagpal, and let's see what you have to say about the poet and the poetry.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. As you mentioned, that today we will be discussing the poet Sylvia Plath, and a poet who's very important from the point of view of, like you've mentioned, psychoanalysis and the whole idea of psychology and how it is reflected in poetry. And from the point of view of feminism, this becomes a very important linkage that we see, the connection between feminism and psychology. So Sylvia Plath's poetry is an important example of the same. At the same time, Plath's poetry has also been rather controversial for the kind of imagery that she has used in her poems. So today we will be discussing in detail her poem Daddy, and briefly also refer to Lady Lazarus. These are the two poems that we'll be referring to. So this is a photograph of Sylvia Plath. As you can see, she was born in 1932, and she chose to end her life in 1963, and which means that she lived for only about 30 years, and she died very young, and she died by committing suicide. But Sylvia Plath's work, her poetry, is very, very significant. So just a few points about her life, that she was born in Boston in 1932. She was married to the poet Ted Hughes in 1956, and they had 2 children, and they later separated in 1962. So it is post this that she chose to end her life. Her first poetry collection was titled The Colossus, and she also wrote a novel that was published initially under a pseudonym, Victoria Lucas, and it was titled The Bell Jar. And be it her prose work or be it her poetry, it drew in a very big way from her personal life. And it's interesting to note that Sylvia Plath had actually published her first poem when she was just about 8 years, and had also almost like sold her first poem to the Christian Science Mirror a few years later. Her poems are known for what we can call the confessional strain in them. And this raises a huge debate about when we read a poem which has a confessional strain. So is that work going to be related entirely to the poet's life, or does it go beyond that? So we will be taking up some of these questions and issues in this lecture. So for example, Daddy is about her very troubled relationship with her father, Otto Plath. She also received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1982, and this was obviously posthumously, and she was the first one to actually get it like this. So as mentioned, that the poem that we are going to discuss is Daddy, and it was written at the time that she was in a very troubled relationship with the poet Ted Hughes. And Daddy, on the other hand, is about her relationship with her father, Otto Plath. Now, her poetry is known for making, especially of this period, is known for its use of Holocaust imagery. So it belongs in that sense to the post Second World War scenario, and her use of the Holocaust imagery is very important. So, for instance, Daddy begins like this: you do not do anymore. Black shoe in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white. So 30 years tells us that this is written, the poem was probably written around 1962, which meant that, this is the time when she had totally, severed her relationship with Ted Hughes. Now, the black shoe here is an indication of the kind of mold that she has been living in for 30 years, and she feels that now this mold will no longer work for her. It's also very kind of prescient in the sense that the mold of life itself is no longer going to work for her. It's become too much for her to absorb, too much for her to take. And it's important to note that the color that is accorded to the shoe is black. So it's a black shoe in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, and to live like a foot also carries with it the entire baggage of the foot carrying the burden of the body, and in that sense the woman carrying the baggage of patriarchal society. So barely daring to breathe or achu. So again there are references here. There are a few phrases that she uses from German, because the ancestry is German, for father being Otto Plath. So but she, through words like achu and a couple of others, she brings in that whole context of the rhythm, in a sense, of the German language. She tries to bring that in, and that of course again leads us to for example, the use of the term akdu, that is German for goodness gracious. And these words actually tell us a lot about her own relationship with the language itself. She's trying to bring the whole context of the German language, and it's important here because she's also somebody who's talking about, as I mentioned, the Holocaust imagery, where she brings in the whole context of the Nazi rise. And we'll see more on that. So this black shoe is, and here I right at the beginning want to raise the question of a poem belonging to the poet in the confessional sense, but also then belonging in the larger sense to the world of the readers and what it really means to them. So the black shoe for her could be anything ranging for her from her personal life to the life that is symptomatic of any other woman. It belongs to other women also, for who are living their lives in molds that are very, very constricting, because it's a foot it's a foot that is trapped in the shoe, and it can barely dare to breathe or say goodness gracious. So here I'd request Professor Prakash also to share his views on just these first couple of lines from the poem Daddy.
No, this actually lays bare the entire background of the poem, which was written, as you say, in 1961. But then she has borne the burden of the Second World War when she was young, less than adolescent. She would be 7 years when the war started, and because it's a German connection, so she must always be worried about the safety of German citizens from 1939 onwards, and you refer to the Holocaust. So it's a double bind in which I can see this poem, that the entire society has become repressive, and then within that a woman has more to bear. And particularly the concept of the shoe, and the shoe completely choking the foot is an image that is not easy to comprehend. It tells about the real anguish that she might have gone through. And there doesn't seem to be any way to escape that constricting reality, because after all the foot is caught in the shoe.
Yes.
And it's a very powerful image. And when you say things about the confessional, then I think she is very concerned about her personal pain, and she wants to let people know what kind of situation she is living in. So confessional is in fact more intense than autobiographical.
Yes, so I completely agree with you that there is the confessional aspect to her poetry, and at the same time she is a poet who's not simply using poetry to express her anguish and her anxieties, but she's also somebody who as a poet is able to transform her personal experience through craft into a poem, because this, like you said, this particular image, the metaphor in a sense of the foot trapped in the shoe, is unusual. It's not something that we usually come across. So I think she's also conscious of the craft, and she's using poetry as a very concrete medium to talk about her personal life, and also to indicate how obviously this in a big way, in a large way, belongs to other women also.
And in the lighter vein, I may say that it relates so well with the Indian woman.
Yes.
Because she is always called, Paon ki juti.
Paon ki juti.
And
Absolutely.
straight away, the metaphor gets transferred to the Indian conditions.
Yes, completely agree. Which is why, there are critics who have defended this line. There are critics who've said that she's used poetry only as a medium to just talk about her personal life. But in that sense, I think it belongs across borders, across countries. It belongs to the readers.
She has to talk about personal life.
Yes.
To whose life should she be?
She refer to, yes, absolutely. So in the next stanza, she writes, Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time. Marble heavy. So she loses her father when she's very young. At about when she's about 8 or 9 years old. So it's a very complex relationship. So on the one hand, she misses the father, but on the other hand, which is why a whole lot of the psychoanalytical branch has also kind of read into her relationship with the father. But it's like she experiences that vacuum, but at the same time, what she remembers of him is a figure who's very, very autocratic. So she says that, Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time. Marble heavy, a bag full of God. Costly statue with one grey toe, big as a Frisco seal. So here, I think it's a direct address and a direct presentation to the reader, where I think she's talking about the father, of course, dies before she can think about physically addressing him in any way. But the fact that in her poetry, she is killing him. And that is again important because he represents that autocratic figure. He's like the patriarch, the dictator in that sense. Marble heavy, a bag full of God. So marble heavy in the sense that you remember people by creating these statues and so on. So marble heavy in that sense, and a bag full of God, indicating that how the father is considered to be within patriarchy, that godlike figure. But she reverses this in the next line. She looks at him as a ghastly statue with one grey toe. And there is a reference actually to Otto Plath's own life, where he had a gangrenous toe, and the gangrene had spread, and so the amputation had to be done. And so how the personal and the political are so beautifully combined in her poetry. And in that sense, it is something that goes beyond. We of course get an insight into her life, and poetry is meant to do that. But we also get to see how the poem becomes symptomatic of the plight of the woman in a patriarchal society. So the toe is like this huge Frisco seal, and a head in the freakish Atlantic, like massive, where it pours bean green over blue, in the waters of beautiful Nauset. And Nauset is the place that she had come to with her father, and it's supposed to be a very beautiful terrain. So I used to pray to recover you. Akdu. So she says that I used to pray to recover you. Goodness gracious me, how could I ever think of something like this? So here the figure of the father is presented to us almost as if it's this overarching figure, and how she actually looks at this figure through that gangrenous toe. So in the German tongue, that is Akdu in the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, wars, wars. But the name of the town is common, my Polak friend. So we see how the context of the war is also brought in here. Here again.
Very suggestive, very evocative. and it's a toe, it's a leg, and that is crushing the other individual, the woman individual. At the same time, it is gangrenous. So I think the whole thing blows out of proportion and becomes about the society in which she lives. That the society is a disease at its soul, at its inner core, and that is spreading all over the body, and the woman is caught in that kind of a frame. So it becomes more social, in fact, than it appears to be. It's
Yes.
not confessional.
Yes, yes.
To me, at least.
I think it is confessional, but the confessional is only a starting point, is what I would say, which is why I wanted to bring in that debate about how the poem belongs actually to its times.
The society is confessing, in fact, through her.
Through her. So, and she's bringing in the war very clearly, and when we see later in the poem the kind of imagery that is used, it's very clear how the war has really affected her. So, in the German tongue, in the Polish town, that is scraped flat by the roller of wars, wars, wars. But the name of the town is common, my Polak friend. So, the German occupation of Poland is clearly indicated over here, and how everything is just reduced in a sense to rubble. So, says my Polak friend says, there are a dozen or two. So I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. The tongue stuck in my jaw. So her own inability to actually communicate with her father is something that is clearly mentioned here. But at the same time, it is also about the relationship between the father and the daughter at a larger level, which is very alienating. So the father is such a towering figure, authoritative and unreachable, that the young girl can never really speaking communicate. And so she writes, it stuck in a barb, a wire snare, ick, 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 I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you. So here I think the father is now associated with being a German. And I think if you could also kind of comment on this.
I would say basically she is letting us know as to how the circumstances at that time held out. And the attack of Germany on Poland and occupation, you say, is a very dangerous word in politics of the 20th century. That another country which is supposed to be a friend of the original one is now entering your country and trying to impose on you its own laws. So that's what Germany does to Poland. And Germany was at that point of time a very controversial presence in the international scene. It was dividing the whole world into pro-German and anti-German. So I believe that even though it has that autobiographical element, as you suggest, it also has, very direct references to the political frame at that time.
Absolutely.
So, I hope you would agree with this. And there is another point that I would like to raise. There is a kind of, she is not making a distinction between whether she is a Catholic or she is a Christian or a Jew, but it's quite clear that religion to her appears to be a likely target of all criticism that women will make about society, and that she is finding religion as something very, very objectionable, very, very suppressive at that point of time.
I completely agree. In fact, that's pretty much the next point that the poem takes up. And I think it's important how in the figure of the father, not only from the point of view of feminism here or the point of view of gender, but also the political frame, how the figure of the father is seen more as an autocratic figure but also as a German. So she says, I thought every German was you. And the language obscene, an engine, chuffing me off like a Jew. So, and then she talks about the concentration camps and says, a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen, and all three are concentration camps. Right from southern to northern Germany, these are the concentration camps. And I think critics who are sharply critical of Sylvia Plath for only looking at poetry through the confessional mode or using it as a medium to talk about her life, I think one look at this particular poem, which is a very, very popular one, Daddy, I think it tells us very clearly how the personal, the political, the geopolitical order of the times, how the poem belongs to the post-Second World War scenario. And so she relates herself not to, being the German, but to the Jew. So she says, shuffling me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen, all three being, places where there were the concentration camps. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. So she identifies herself as a woman, and a woman who relates to the most marginal of characters. So, of course, at one level, one can say that the plight of the Jews in the concentration camps was so pathetic that it couldn't be compared to that of the women. But it remains to understand that the idea is she's expressing her marginality as a woman, and she likens it to being a Jew at the time. And this, in that sense, is a kind of political identification, a political metaphor that she's using and bringing in her poetry. And no holds barred, she's going all out there and talking about what it really speaking means for her to be a part of this world that she's seen upgrowing. And it's very alienating for her as a woman. But here she relates it to being a Jew.
I also would like to raise this point regarding the same poem having one kind of effect when it is written and when it is read for the first time, and when it is read after 40, 50 or 60 years. And today, this appears not to be confessional and not
at all, yes.
autobiographical at all.
Yes.
It's all about the Second World War. It's all about the German experience at that time of the ordinary citizen and a woman, and who sides with identifies themselves, as read out, with the Jews, and the kind of helplessness that they suffered. So today, I would not bother about relationship with the father and all, but I'll definitely like to know about the world, the kind of nightmares it gave to the ordinary sensitive woman, and that's what Sylvia Plath is for us.
Yes, but I would still iterate that the confessional is only a takeoff point, because a lot of the images that are there in this particular poem, we will be able to understand the imagery only by kind of reading a little bit about her life, like the grey toe, or her relationship with her father and why she's really writing about it. But yes, at the outset, if I were to read this poem without really getting to know anything about Sylvia Plath, for me this would really be a war poem more than anything else. And so we have the war poets between the First and the Second World War, but here is a woman who's really speaking, using the whole context of feminism to look at the relationship of between women, their identity, where they are situated in the world, and of course the entire world politics.
And she is a child of 6 years when the war begins, 7 years.
7 years.
And when the war ends, then she is 14 or so, 13 or 14, which means that entire formative period is determined by the war.
Absolutely, and I think if somebody like Sylvia Plath would have lived, there would probably be a separate category of women war poets, I think, and she would probably be at the helm of them all. So, if we move on further to the next stanza here, the snows of the Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna are not very pure or true, she says. And she talks about her ancestry now. So on the one hand, she talks about herself as a Jew, and then she talks about, in a very George Eliot sort of manner, with my gypsy ancestress, and my weird luck, and my tarot pack, I may be a bit of a Jew. So again, she correlates the gypsy ancestry and calls herself a Jew once again. And this
in any case, women are always imagining themselves as Jews, as gypsies.
As gypsies, yes. So, as I said, which is why I totally thought of George Eliot there.
Maggie particularly.
Maggie particularly, Mill on the Floss. So, with my gypsy ancestress and my weird luck and my tarot pack, so the whole idea of reading into the future and so on. So, she says, well, I may be a bit of a Jew here. And she says, well, I have always been scared of you. And the you here is the father, because, we have to see that, in her poetry, Ted Hughes is also going to appear. And with your Luftwaffe, that is the moustache, and your gobbledygook, and your neat moustache, and your Aryan eye, bright blue. So she's physically describing the father as a figure that, in the description, you'd want to think that probably this is, the handsome Aryan, but that is not the case at all. It's a figure that is intimidating. It's a figure that she is scared of. So the relationship within the institution of the family that the girl child shares with the father is one that is very, very hierarchical, and is one where she only ends up feeling very scared of him. And so this, I think, is another important
Do you see
takeaway
some
point.
similarity between her face and Hitler, her father's face and Hitler's? Because
She's clearly describing him. The whole context of the Aryan here, I think, is very clearly close to Hitler, because she's going to bring in the swastika later, the symbol of the Nazi party. So that, of course, is going to be there.
So, friends, Dr. Payal Nagpal has at the moment told us a few very important things about the poem Daddy by Sylvia Plath, and the kind of expansiveness, the kind of extensions that it has, with respect to starting with a personal note and then spreading over the entire, scene and the entire curtain, and then telling us clearly as to how wide the scope of such a poem can be. So, I think in the following discussion, there will be more, examination of the images, of the pictures, of the kind of, suggestive phrases that will occur in the poem. So, till then, thank you.